Good afternoon. I knew it was a mistake to come to speak third because all the wisdom has already been shared with you. And I've been an academic or in academia long enough now to feel that 20 minutes is almost an insult because every lecture should be at least an hour long. So I'm going to try and compress what I have to say. But fortunately, I'm not in any sense in competition with either of the two eminent speakers that have just gone before me, because I would have taken the bronze. And I'm going to come from a very different angle. The downside of that is that I'm likely to cause offence. Now, it would be normal for me to apologise in advance, but since I know I'm going to cause offence, it seems invidious to then apologise. So it's more by way of a warning. Now, I'm married to probably the best nursery school teacher in the country, and but it has a strong influence on the way that I live my life. So I showed Lorna, my wife, this question. And since her main task is to teach this week, because it's the start of the academic year, this week it's teaching the number 1, she was a bit confused as to whether this question was actually seriously constructed or whether the words had been put in a random order. So I've reflected on this for some time now, because Kayla and Alice are very well organised, as you know, and so I've had plenty of notice about this lecture. And I'm sort of riven now by this worry that as a profession, and I'm a civil engineer, not an architect, we're in a constant state of angst. We're always worrying about how seriously does everybody take us, and does everybody know how difficult it is to be a built environment professional? Do you think these buildings build themselves? And so when people come in and say, where's the bloody light switch? And, oh, well, I'm afraid it's architect designed. There's a movement sensor. Or you know, there's a disconnect between us as a club of built environment professionals and them. And Stephen Hill's point, actually, Stephen, you should be giving this talk. It's fundamental, really, because we don't think enough about what's the purpose, what's the system into which whatever it is we're being asked to do fits. And I wonder whether we don't therefore think too much about what it is that we do with each other, and we think not enough about what it is that we're doing it for. Engineers, particularly civil engineers, you saw where our headquarters are. Very nice building, very, very nice cafe on the second basement level, and right close to Westminster, and completely misses the opportunity to use that opportunity. We're constantly, civil engineers are completely absorbed in the trade press, the New Civil Engineer magazine, by our status in society, and we're constantly reflecting on how it is that civil engineers aren't treated more seriously. You know, doctors are treated very seriously, and lawyers are treated very seriously.
You should be a structural engineer.
I'm sorry, I don't know any structural engineers. But then this whole debate is conducted inside the profession. They write to the New Civil Engineer to say, I think engineers should be taken more seriously. Well, of course, there's general agreement for that in the New Civil Engineer, but in the Spectator, there'll probably be a bit less unanimity. And I was a long time in a company which no longer exists. I don't think my leaving it was the cause of its demise. But it became part of URS, or as my wife calls it, UARS, and URS and AECOM are now one. And I'm struck by being somewhat more on the outside of the corporate life now. That I look back and I think there was a phenomenal amount of my day spent thinking about my colleagues, my position in the company, and to a certain extent the people I managed, and a phenomenally small percentage of my time thinking about my clients and the projects that I was working on. And it's quite telling, I think, to reflect on how much time people in corporate life reflect on how is the machine doing. A lot of people are down in the engine room, and there are very few people who explore what it's like on the bridge. Of course, the process of design has become immensely complex. I mean, you only have to look at almost any building to understand that actually it's immensely difficult to deliver the services that that building delivers and take a simplistic approach to it. But the connection between performance and design, I think, has been weakened rather than strengthened, so that the process becomes the dominant feature. You've got to get through the process to get to the end goal. The process now determines how to get to the end point. And there are stage gates in any project. I'm much more familiar with civil infrastructure than I am with buildings. But there are points beyond which decisions that would be sensible by any normal criteria are not possible to be taken because the stage of the project at which that decision could be taken has been passed. Of course, I'm among friends, and none of this, I will admit to none of this, but on the Olympic Park, it was noticed quite late in the day on the decontamination strategy that it would have been cheaper to adopt a completely different strategy than the one that was finally adopted. And when this was brought forward to the Olympic Delivery Authority at the time, they felt that to change to a cheaper, better, environmentally preferable and quicker actually solution would be a higher risk than to pursue the one that had already been decided. And so the mechanisms were not in place to allow a better decision to be taken. That's happening all of the time. And I think that there are real difficulties that we have in, if we do have increasing complexity, then we need to find ways of addressing a lot of these bigger decision-making issues, because they're often taken on the basis, they're often taken nominally on the basis of risk, that we need to find ways of addressing those more intelligently than we do now. Now, this bit will only cause offence if there's anybody here from the Northwest Cambridge team. Northwest Cambridge is the biggest development that Cambridge University has ever undertaken. It's a fabulously ambitious project. Cambridge University, now if I press this, all the lights may go off. Oh no, that's Cambridge, and that's Northwest Cambridge there. So it's a big piece of land. And it's a new development, and it's hugely exciting. 3,500 homes, 2 new colleges, a hotel, university training school, old people's home, Lots of very exciting things. And I'm only using it as an example because actually, measured against all other schemes where there are 3,500 homes in new developments, it's probably as good as you get anywhere in the country. It's just not as good as it could be. But the really important message from this project is that I joined this, or I was part of the first sustainability panel about 5 years ago. But the project had been conceived of and outline designed considerably before that point. And the point I'm making is that an area action plan, which is part of the process of planning and development, which the local authorities, because there are 2 local authorities involved, had come together to designate this area with the compliance and the agreement of Cambridge University, had developed an area action plan. Within the area action plan, there had to be some definition. Of course, there had to be some definition about what you were going to put in this piece of land. Was it going to be resi? Was it going to be mixed? Was there going to be any B1? Was there going to be any academics? And so on. All of that was thrashed out. So the big picture was defined. Then, of course, that went through the usual democratic process. Although now, I think to call it a democratic process in the light of what's happened in Scotland recently is to put it in a slightly different context. It went through the process that we currently have through representative democracy, but I think most people in Cambridge would have been completely unaware of it. And then there was an outline planning application which started to fill in some of the details. You're familiar with the process, the key features of the layout. And then at the detailed planning application stage, things will get more secure in terms of what's going to happen. The point about the story is that the process of getting to the point where you can get agreement to build whatever you're going to build includes a number of negotiations, agreements, closed-door deals between local authorities, government and the landowner or developer, which lock out a whole lot of opportunities had there been a sufficiently interdisciplinary, intelligent and ambitious team and client to deliver a higher level of ambition and goal in terms of the project outcomes. So that, for example, there's a pressure relief road that runs from Madingley Road to Huntingdon Road that bisects the development. It's very necessary for Cambridge's chronic traffic problem, but it's very deleterious to the overall conceptualization of an integrated community in that area. And there are a number of other things which had to be agreed at an early stage, but which wouldn't have been agreed had you had, for example, just for example, sustainability as one of your objectives. And of course, sustainability I now realize is a bit of a kicking boy for, we've all had a good go at sustainability this afternoon. And sustainability, I think, certainly 10 years ago, you could have defined sustainability in the built environment as all those elements of a design that ended up on the value engineering floor. But I think we've matured a bit, and I think there's more to say. So this idea, obviously this is a little bit of a lecture coming in because I just can't help myself, but the idea of sustainability being introduced at the conceptual or inherent stages of a project is actually rather rare, and all sustainability considerations, including the formation of a sustainability panel, comes in after conceptual and inherent decisions have all been taken, and then given that, how would you like to make this more sustainable? So are there any options with doing something completely radical with transport, driverless pods or monorail, or something really cool? Because this is Cambridge, it is one of the best universities in the world. It does own this land. It could develop this as being a kind of icon of what it's trying to research and teach. Those opportunities had gone by the time the area action plan and the outline planning application had been made. And this is not a knocking Cambridge story. It's what happens all the time, because the people who have management of risk and funding are not the people who think that their first call is going to be to go and talk to the visionary designers and the sustainability advisors. I think we need to be careful not to spend too long beating ourselves up, but I think one of the things that some research that we've been doing at Cambridge has shown is that when our researcher went out and talked to designers about what measures do you take in your design process to future-proof what you're doing, almost nobody that was interviewed across a very wide section of the construction industry was able to articulate what future-proofing actually amounted to, and certainly couldn't point to any activities. And so the nature of design is to deliver to a specification which of course has an inherent durability associated with it, but explicit future-proofing is not part of the design process. And although life cycle thinking is used almost routinely now, it tends to be a post hoc assessment of how did we do rather than a decision-making influencer. So, when you come to the sustainability piece and the process of design, I think in sort of energy, water, materials, whatever, changing attitudes and behaviour is possible, but it has to happen alongside elaborate technical interventions. My sense is, in fact I've heard this often, is that when you go to a post-occupancy evaluation or you go to a review of a building's performance, or a development's performance, and you say, because there are buildings, you know, not a million miles from here, which I'm not going to name, which are using 3 times as much energy as they were designed for. Only 5 years ago. It's not like it's an old history story. People will say, well, you know, the facilities manager doesn't understand the job, the maintenance people are too stupid to work out what's going on with our fantastically balanced airflow management system, and somebody opened a window last week. So how can I be held responsible for the energy? And enforcement doesn't really work. Do you know, when you build a prison, probably not many of you have designed a prison, but when you build a prison, you don't say, I think everybody will sort of work it out how the system works and it'll be okay. You build sanitary units that don't have flippy-oppy lids so that they can't be broken off and used as a weapon or as a knife for suicide. And you don't have taps which unscrew from the wall, and you don't have doors that can be kicked in, because you know that some prisoners are really quite nasty people, or troubled anyway. And so you design for your occupant. And yet when you come to often rather simple buildings, particularly office buildings, the reason that you feel that the building hasn't delivered against the promise that it was giving at the time of design is that the occupants hadn't behaved as they should have done when the modelling was done. And I think that really is something that the profession needs to get to grips with. So the complexity of having all of those disciplines that Sophie had, pages and pages of disciplines, and pages of specialists. You know, you're going to need a mechanical engineer, you're going to need a geotechnical engineer, you're going to Of course, what would the client expect? You know, that you're going to build this without thinking about the foundation? Of course you're going to need disciplines, but the disciplines aren't what matter to the people who commission what it is that we're trying to provide as the built environment professionals. They want the product. They want accommodation or facility. And my closing thought is that if we were to hold ourselves up against the automotive industry, would we really expect to go and, when we wanted to buy a car, would we go to a car builder and say, well, we know that we'd like a car, but I wonder if you could call in a mechanical engineer, an electrical engineer, because I'm worried about the lights. You know, I think it should have lights. Shouldn't it have lights? Probably has lights. And then air conditioning and colour and paint. That is a process which is focused on what's delivered. And our industry is an industry which is focused on how to go through the process. And Alan Short is in the audience, and Alan and I have been working together for almost a year now on looking at the way in which hospitals do energy efficiency. That's, you know, there's days of fascinating stories in there. But one thing that strikes you about looking into the NHS, peeping into the NHS, you've got people who are in a system which is chaotic, management chaotic, and yet everybody in that system somehow makes people better. It somehow makes it work. And there is a kind of value set which doesn't need enormously elaborate checks and balances. They do have checks and balances for the protection of patients. But the level of commitment in people who are poorly paid and overstretched and working in absolute close proximity with some of the most vulnerable people in society seem to get to a position of common purpose, which I think the built environment professionals would really do well to try and copy. We should look more, much more, outside the built environment world to see what lessons we can learn from others. Thank you.